early and late, and a mid-season. That's strictly it. And you wonder why I spaced it. So far I've been able to cultivate it with the tractor, with the big, what I call the big tractor, which is about 35 horsepower. And I have a tool behind it with some cultivating shoes, and I can go through it, and that's the job it leaves. So I'm pleased with it, the way it's growing. So you can see for yourselves.
So when would you have typically planted the cabbage and the potatoes?
These were all planted Victoria Day, Victoria weekend, which is something like May 21st or something like that. That's when we planted the potatoes. And the cabbages were all started on May 1st. The seed went into the ground.
Direct seed?
No, into pots, and then 10 days later they were transplanted again in what I call the growing boxes. And you will see them when we get back home. So that's about all in a nutshell that I can tell you about this part of the property. But as you can see, it all adds up work. They helped me plant it, and they went through it once with the hole in between the plants a bit, and the rest is basically I did with the machinery.
Now, is there any natural indicators or anything for when you should plant, or is it kind of just by knowledge of just past history?
I live here now for this long. I know that May 1st is about the time for me to start with the plants indoors in the greenhouse that I'm willing to show you. Okay?
And the same thing with the potatoes?
Exactly. Well, the potatoes are bought, and I usually cut them in advance and lay them out in a single layer, for the reason that is, if you put them back in the bag, they all ooze liquid, and then everything sticks together and you get a great big mess, if not rotting as such. So that's the substance. So I just give them, well, they're probably chopped up 3 weeks in advance before planting. And so that's a job, like I call them the rainy day jobs, because I can sit down inside and do it inside. If it's wet land or dry land, does it flood or doesn't it? I have a piece along the brook. The crops grow really well, and then you get late summer, you get one of these typhoons or whatever you want to call them, and you get everything flooded. If it's flooded more than 24 hours, you might as well kiss the crop goodbye. It's just that simple, because it starves of oxygen, and what happens is they set into rotting and you end up with nothing. That's what happens with flooded land. So if you have a wet territory, that's why you see the areas where they, along water supply, that they crown the land. And you can see a very good example of it as you go down to the end of the road here before you go on the Trans-Canada. If you look to your left coming from here, you'll see all those intervals, and they're all crowned, and there's a ditch running through to drain it off into the watershed. And that's how they control it to some degree, not entirely, to some degree. But grass and grass-related crops they will take it. But if you take vegetables of any kind, they won't take it. Simple as that. Viability for germination and to grow a new plant. Not like a lot of the other ones. So you have to be very careful with that. A lot of people complain, oh, my parsnips don't do nothing and this and that and the other thing. And then if you ask them, well, did you use last year's seed or this year's seed? And in most cases, 99% of the cases, they said, well, it was last year's seed. I said, that's your trouble right there. So that's how it goes. Now, on the other hand, you can have tomato seed 5-6 years old, and it all germinates. And the same cabbage family is a very good germinator. The reason cabbage is in the brassica family or the oil family, they all have an oil coating on the seed. That's where your canola oil comes from and stuff like that. From the wild mustard, they produce seed pods as well. They trash it and then they extract the oil from it by heat, of course. And that's what you're buying is the canola oil. That's where that comes from, basically. So let's continue on. Red ferns. Now, the haskaps require male and female plants for pollination. But this year, equivalent to last year, there's nothing on them. They had some fruit on it very early in the beginning. Then we saw some birds coming in, and they got the rest of it. So that's in a nutshell. Now, if you want to see some kind of diseases, here's red currant, and look at the leaf. Instead of nice and red, these are full of mites and aphids, and that produces these kind of leaves. The leaf should look like these here, but this is what happens in the new young growth. So called the Egyptian onion, and as you can see, they're forming their new little balls right there. And what happens, they get big enough that the stem falls to the ground and they anchor themselves and they're off to the next crop. That's how they multiply. This here, by the way, is winter garlic, planted in the fall. And I have taken the scape off it, the growing tip from this stalk here was the seed stalk, and by cutting them out you increase your bulb size by, I won't say too much, between 20 and 30%.
If you cut the garlic scapes out?
Yeah. That's your reward for.
So how long on average do you think it is from when you plant a sapling of a pear tree until you get bare fruit on it?
That's a very good question, but I'd say you almost have to wait 3 or 4 years at least.
I've heard lots of different stories about turnips. So how long would you keep these turnips in the ground?
Until the snow flies, basically. They can stand frost. But the summer turnip doesn't do that. The summer turnip was the distinction between summer turnip and this one. This is a biannual. The summer turnip is an annual, meaning from seed to seed can all be done in one season. Biannual is first you grow the tuber itself. The second year it sends up the flower stalk, and then it goes to seed. So that's how that goes. Then we have some rhubarb that you keep the flower stalk out. And if you're interested, I can show you the asparagus patch. And you can cut this off, and cut that off, and that's your. That's how I deal with rhubarb.
So you wouldn't cut it off with a knife, you just tug it off from the...
No, you trim the stalk up like this, and that's your stalk.
And you get a little bit of sugar, and you...
Well, for some people that's...
You eat it like you did when you were a little kid.
Yeah.
Yesterday I pulled a stalk up, and attached was a new growth to that.
Yeah, that can happen very easily.
Could I have cut that back in
Well, I don't know. I can't, I've never done that.
Okay. That's the first time that has happened.
But that won't be the last either. You may as well take them home. Supposedly Bishop Pippin grafted on there. And that's a big yellow apple, it's a late apple. And then, well,
And what was that name again?
Bishop Pippin.
Okay. Is that an old variety?
It's one of the older varieties, yes.
And is that a common apple that's grown in Nova Scotia?
Oh yeah, they used to have them years ago, and then after forgetting some of them because I used to look after them at the college and so on. And had to do the spraying. Oh man, what a last year. But I did see a couple on them.
Yeah, there's one right up. The birds must like them.
Well, there's always a whole slew of them at the bottom. But anyway, what I was trying to do was make an arch out of it. But stuff like that, if you do that, then it takes time. You can't do that all in 1 year. You have to pick your time. And that's an archway that we had the year my youngest daughter got married, and she's married for 12 years almost. Because they travel so far.
So you said you were at a dairy farm in the Netherlands. That's where...
My father had a small dairy farm with 7 or 8 cows, 3 or 4 yearlings, and a few calves. And then he had a bunch of pigs, depending on, and a few sows that produce young piglets. And then we had a chicken coop for 200 birds. And my job was partly gathering eggs and making sure that the eggs came to the house and so on. As kids, that is, we always had to do something. We were part of the family, so we all had to pitch in, no matter what it was. So that's why my work ethic is what it is.
So when did you come to Canada?
1955.
Okay. And did you come by yourself, or did you come...
No, we came as a family unit.
Came as a family unit.
There was 13 of us all together. It's a big task for my parents too. I have to tip the hat to them. And yeah, later on, of course, I met my wife in Annikeness, and her parents live in Annikeness. Some of her brothers still live there. And we got married in '71, and so that gives you an idea.
So what inspired your parents to move from the Netherlands to Nova Scotia?
Gelderland is one part where we came from originally, and the wife's family is from Aston, which is southerly in the country. So, not that I'm fully detailed on her side of the family, but anyway, that's the story. And we raised 4 kids of our own. 3 girls and 1 boy. I have a daughter married in...
Come here originally to farm?
Yes.
Okay. And was that like an incentive by the government or anything?
No. But we were all born in the Netherlands. And they had it upon themselves that they wanted to immigrate. They've wondered about Canada or Australia. That would have been their second choice type of thing. Anyway, it ended up to be in Nova Scotia. And when it was time, my father was in contact in the Netherlands that somebody had moved to Canada and he's coming back and so on. And he came to visit, I know that much, and they talked for a while. And basically, he had a farm he wanted to sell, so that's the farm that my father bought. And from there on, life went on. So that's how come. If not, you have to add drainage to the soil. And the reason for that is no plant likes to be wet too long a period. Especially, say, like if you're going along a brook or something like that, they stand underwater, it just doesn't do them any good, that's for sure. And as you notice, the climate is different than where you folks are, so that has a little bit of a role to play. Depending on, you can put up some kind of a windbreak for them, but that's how it goes. On the average, your fruit trees, you have about, if you're working with the old standard fruit trees, you'll have about 40 plants of 40 trees to the acre. If you go to modern style, it's something like 2,200 seedlings.
In 1
But
acre?
they plant them in rows and they support them with a fence, and then they go along, cut it with mechanical means, which is a mower, a sickle mower, with the blade going back and forth like that, and they can reach over the top as well, do it all mechanically. Then they can clean it up, of course. After every pruning, a person has to make sure that you clean up everything below the trees. And when you put in a modern orchard, it'd be a smart idea in between the rows, 6 to 8 feet is when they set them apart, and they keep it mowed. And then you plant your trees and you put your supports up. Now the standard types, you put a support up for a short little while so that they're well anchored and standing straight. Because especially in windy areas, if you don't have a windbreak on them, you end up with falling over. So these are some of the things that you have to consider when you're starting. So from there on, you plant it, trees all go dormant, or in other words, asleep for the winter. And sun or rain or shine, it doesn't matter. Sometimes you have situations when the weather has 3 nice days, for instance, sun shining in the daytime and so forth. Not that I want to discourage you, but it's a good potential that you lose your bloom by that, because what happens is the tree thinks that it's spring, it starts to come alive, the sap starts flowing, and then you get the severe frost on top of it, bingo. The same applies for in May, for instance, if you have a late frost. If blooms are out, and if it's severe enough, it can kill the blossom or partially kill it, and you get all the misformed apples. That's how you get some of the fruit. Now, today, the modern housewife, they want nothing but perfection. What happens to the other ones? You know, unless you put them into sauce or juice, they're useless if you don't clean them up right away and make sure that it's all taken care of. So these are some of the things that you can have with trees. And the other thing I want to make sure that everybody gets is the fact that the bud formation for the flowers for next spring are being grown starting about now until about the end of September, because then the temperature can drop and so on. And the thing that you have to really know is the difference between a flower bud and a leaf bud. That's for your pruning purposes. The amount that you prune out in trees, as a rule, 20 to 30%. You definitely don't do more than 50, unless you have a 40 or 50-year-old tree that shows, you know, out of shape and you want to bring it back into shape and so on. The other thing that I have to stress is the fact that you want to make sure that you know the difference, and then you get into the aspect of grafting. Now, most trees are grafted, most of it. And when you're doing the grafting, it's usually the last season's growth that's on the trees now is what you harvest, say like March, and then you store them in a cool, moist condition. That's either in the bottom of a crisper or a cooler, so that they stay moist. And there's 2 ways of keeping them moist. One is you use a plastic bag, and when you collect your sign wood, you only do it from trees that you know what variety they are, because there are thousands and thousands of different varieties all around the world. There are varieties here that don't do well here at all, and others respond totally different. For instance, some of the trees that they produce in the Annapolis Valley may not do well in BC, vice versa. So you have to know all these things in advance, or before you go into the expense. Once you have all that data collected, then you can start planting your trees. And usually there's methods. You got to make sure when you dig a hole for a young tree that it's big enough and wide enough that you can spread the roots out as best as you can so that it can take hold right away. The best time to plant new trees is in the spring of the year. Now, if by any chance you have to move a tree that's in the wrong place at the proper location that you are in, and you say, well, that's not where I want that variety of fruit, you have the option of doing it early in the spring or even later. But don't forget, when you move any kind of plant, doesn't matter what kind of plant you have, it's trees, it's shrubs, vegetable garden, you always water it in. And the reason for that is simply when you pour water on the soil, it washes the clay particles down in around the root system. You take the air out of that area. Otherwise they may dry out and you lost the plant. So that applies to all plants, trees, shrubs, or anything. Now some are more susceptible to stuff like that than others. I have transplanted bushes as big as that white plant there, and I said I will do it only on one occasion. You got to promise me that you put a bucket of water on there every week. For the simple reason, it takes a lot of energy for that plant to reestablish itself. And the only way it can reestablish itself if you lock the air out of it, and so that the plant can keep growing. Now, in vegetables, we usually use a bit of plant starter in it. Usually in planting an orchard or something like that, you go through it with a general fertilizer and whatever they recommend according to the soil sample that you take before you start planting. And basically what that is an auger you push in the ground about yay deep, and you mix it in the bucket, mix it all up, and then you grab, usually they have sample boxes about 3 to 4 inches by 3 to 4 inches, and then about 2 inches deep, and you have to mark on your name, address, field, where it come from, and then you have the option, they'll give you the pH on it, the nitrogen, phosphorus, and potash, which are the main elements in the soil for plant growth. Now mind you, there are others like boron, molybdenum, iron. Those are other ones that are very important that are in the soil. But a lot of them, they call them the trace. So basically, in a nutshell, that's when you have your trees in the ground, and then comes pruning. Now, if you have, for instance, an old orchard and you have to graft over, well, there's several different ways of grafting. It's the same with the sign wood that you use, like I explained, that you have early in You collect it in March sometime and keep it moist in the fridge, and then on a fine sunny day, in April or May, whenever, you can put them in. When you do the grafting, you have to make sure all the wound is covered up with something. It is saran wrap or elastic plastic tape. That all works as long as it's tight, and so that it can't dry out. What happens is, in the crack that you're producing, if you don't cover the crack up completely, that's where the air gets in and the plant dries out, or the graft dries out, and you're lost the time that you put into it. So that's some of the basic information I can give you. Through the seed, through the flower, to give you that apple. They all have parents. For instance, the Ripson tree that we have here is developed in England, and there's a fruit station there. It's called Malling Merton. And that's where they developed this rootstock. Now once you have a rootstock, then they have to graft on the variety that they want. And that's where the grafting comes in. Now, I'm still of the old fashion, and I'll show you the grafting knife that we use for grafting. It's razor sharp, and as you can see, it has a tip on it here, and that's for to peel the bark back a little bit. It's the reason why you have to pull the bark back a little bit is because right underneath that is what they call the cambium layer. The cambium layer is the youngest of youngest growth in the tree. So when you have the signwood coming up, and you've prepared the sign piece of wood that you have, usually it's about 3 to 4 buds long. You taper them, and after you peel the bark back gently, you set it in. That's one type of grafting. Another type is, for instance, you have a tree limb that's about 1 inch in diameter or a little better. They have a tool called a cleft knife, and it's shaped along like this, and it's a sharp edge and so on, and quite a bit of weight to it, almost like a hatchet. You slam into the bark and you split it open slightly. Then you take, it has a nib on it similar as the grafting knife. You can pry it open a little bit. Then you take your piece of signwood, and as I said, the new youngest of the youngest wood has to make contact, and that has to grow. So by setting them slightly on a slant, at some point these two cambium layers come together, from the bark that you pulled back and the bark that's the cambium layer that's in on the signwood. And what that does is feeds the graft. Now, especially, it works quite well on young trees, but they usually graft them up this high off the ground. And for that reason, it's mainly for the mice and stuff like that. They have protectors on it. When you go to the valley, you see the sleeves, white sleeves, that are actually open, and they curl them right on to roughly the height of the snow load in the winter, because if you have the field mice and stuff like that, they got to live off something too. But that's where they go, is on the young trees, where they can bite through the bark and nibble on the bark wood, and that gives them the energy and the protein that they need to survive the winter.
So when people would have done it more of like a homesteading method, what would be the differences between the homesteading method, you know, say 100 years ago, and a modern type?
Well, for one thing, you have the big trees, and they require each big tree, usually you can count on an hour to an hour and a half for pruning in the spring. That's one thing. That's a big expense this time of year in comparison to the new method. Secondly, they use totally different chemicals. They use chemicals like mercury, captan, and stuff like that. Chemicals have completely changed.
Well,
Of today's...
When you know better, you do better. Right?
Yeah. They do the monitoring, and by monitoring is setting a yellow tray in under the trees, and you put a bit of soap in with that, so they get stuck. And they do that at the research station in Kentford, for example. They set them under the trees. Somebody is assigned to look after that. When they go check, they leave it for a week, then they check it, depending on the weather, the humidity, and all those things. In the olden days, that wasn't done. Now they do that to save on chemicals, time, and equipment.
So you were saying before, when you graft moderately to like modern today, if you grafted an apple, you would plastic wrap it or use that
tape or something like that.
So what would they have used before that?
They used to use beeswax and beeswax mainly, and soot or something to keep it black, and so on. They paint it on, but with that, it still cracks from time to time, and when that happens, the graft is a failure. This is the same with Braco. Braco is a product that's asphalt emulsion, and it's almost like shoe polish. You put it on, it's supposed to form a rubber coating and supposed to stretch with the wound a little bit. By observation and working at the college for 27 years and 9 months, that's one thing over the years, my lifetime. And the other thing that I've learned over the years, any tree over 15 feet, forget about it. Because what grows above it, if it drops on the ground, you get mush. Simple as that.
Oh, yeah. Because of
the drop.
Yeah.
You bruise it so badly.
Yeah.
It's the same as you fall out of a tree and you bruise yourself too.
Yeah, that's true.
Now, did your parents have apple trees when you were growing up?
Yes, they did. But my father knew how to prune them. They were established trees. And in Holland, the land was so precious. He also had pigs. The pigs were grazing underneath the apple trees. He had it all fenced in with electric fence and so on. And they would put staples in their noses, so when they start to root that it would hurt them, and they would stop it, and stuff like that.
So is an apple tree a shallow-rooted tree or a deep-rooted tree?
It's a deep-rooted tree.
Deep-rooted tree.
For example, this is all new growth from this year, and so is this. And when you do the cutting, you see, now there's the other type that are flat on the bottom, and then you can cut, but what they do is they leave a little bit of a stump, more so than this yet. So that's one thing you want to avoid. Now, then when you, in the spring, there's no leaves on here, so you use 3 buds like that, and then just to show you how to make a piece of sign wood. Now you have the potential that you put it in upside down. You want to know what was the top. Then when you make this cut, you saw how I cut that with one cut, and you see you have that. Now your cambium layer is right here, where I'm touching with the knife. So, and then you leave your buds, and when you wrap things up here, you also have to cover that up to avoid drying out. You get it? You get it?
Yeah.
So do you cover that tip with a plastic as well, or do you put like a?
Yeah.
Okay.
Now you want to. What you can do is leave about, say, a little bit more of a stump. So you're always going to have some drying back, even if the wrap came off or cracked or what have you. So that's a proper scion that you put into the graft, as a graft. And so a piece of wood like this is good. The other thing is, you never use the tip end. The reason for that is those buds are not completely mature. So you always have to go back and use it there. Possibly the second one in a situation like that. Okay? Now, when you make it, the sharper the tool, the better. Because this is dead, and you can see that it's brown inside.
A domesticated tree from a wild apple tree?
That's pretty hard to do.
Is it?
Yeah. But usually the young orchards are all newly planted.
Yes, yeah. I was thinking about these ones down at Burncoat Head Park that have been there forever, and I am thinking that where it was a living lighthouse where the family lived, and
Yeah.
then probably the trees were planted by by the family of.
Yeah, that's possible, very well possible.
Yeah.
Now, if the apple variety is a good tasting apple, then don't do anything but prune it normally, and anything over 15 feet, cut it out, and Mother Nature will heal it over, the wounds, and keep the debris out from under it, like the old leaves and sprigs and stuff like that.
And the fallen apples, because right now.
Yeah, all that has to be cleaned up, and if you clean that up, and tidy it up. What you could do the first few years, if you have had a chance for some cow manure or stuff like that, spread that around underneath the canopy of the tree. By that means the full length of the limbs.
Yeah, the drip.
That's your canopy, okay? So that's where you put your fertility.
Have you ever heard of spreading hardwood ashes around the drip line of your trees, of your fruit trees?
I have spread the wood ashes on grass fields, in the garden, doesn't matter, as long as you don't plunk it in one location.
Right, yeah.
If you spread it like fertilizer, no problem whatsoever. You don't notice anything. So that's the extent of it.
I've got two questions about apple trees.
Yeah.
What is the oldest apple tree you've seen or heard of?
I couldn't answer that, to be honest with you.
No? Okay. And what is your favorite tasting apple? Or favorite apple in general, I guess.
Well, Macintosh is a very good apple. Cortland is a good one. And now they're coming out with Honey Crisp, you know, which is a new one, which is tasty.
Jonah Gold.
And Jonah Gold, yeah.
So you hardly beat Old Gravenstein though.
Old-fashioned
favorite apple,
Gravenstein.
old-fashioned
Gravenstein is one of the earliest apples,
Yeah,
but it's a soft apple.
yeah.
And so is the August.
Yeah, they're,
Very soft.
yeah, they're
If you
terrible.
don't use them right away,
Yeah.
you miss out on it.
So do you have a personal favorite?
No, to me, I'm not very fussy when it comes to taste buds. You might as well say, count me out neutral.